This isn't a story I ever imagined myself telling. Not out loud, not to anyone, but I've come to realize that silence doesn't protect us. It just buries the truth deeper, where it festers. So here it is. Raw, uncomfortable, and real. And I'm the wife who cheated. Even just saying those words feels like swallowing glass. Because I never thought I'd be that woman. You know, the one people whisper about behind closed doors? She had it all, and she still threw it away. And maybe they're right. Maybe I did. But it's not that simple. It never is. And I married at 26. My husband was, and is, a good man. The kind who listens, who makes you laugh without trying too hard, who always remembers how you take your coffee. He was safe, loving, steady. Our life together was quiet, comfortable. People envied us. They said we were perfect, and I believed them, until I didn't. And it didn't happen overnight. The unraveling was slow, subtle. I started noticing how often I felt invisible, how the sound of silence at dinner became louder than any argument ever could. He didn't hurt me. He didn't cheat or scream or leave. But he also didn't see me. Not in the way I needed to be seen. Not anymore. And then someone else did. And it started with innocent conversation. At least that's what I told myself. We worked together. He was charming, curious, magnetic. He asked questions my husband had stopped asking years ago. He looked at me like I mattered. And I drank it in like water, in a desert I hadn't realized I'd been dying in. At first, it was just flirting. Harmless, I said. But deep down, I knew I was crossing lines. The late-night texts, the lingering looks, the way I smiled when his name popped up on my phone. It all chipped away at the life I had built. And then came the night that changed everything. And one kiss. That's all it was. But it felt like setting fire to a house I'd spent years building. I kissed him back. I didn't stop it, I let it happen. And in that moment, I knew I had betrayed the man who loved me most. Not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually. This is the moment my story begins. Not with the affair itself, but with the realization that I wasn't the woman I thought I was. I wasn't the wife I had promised to be. And now I have to face everything that came after. After that first kiss, everything changed. And yet, on the surface, nothing did. I still came home to my husband. I still kissed him goodnight. I still packed his lunch and folded his shirts and laughed at his dad jokes during dinner. And but inside. Inside I was splitting in two. And I was now living a double life. And no one knew. Not my friends, not my family, not even him. Especially not him. He still looked at me with love in his eyes, still trusted me without hesitation. And that made it worse. So much worse. Every smile I gave him felt like a lie. Every I love you like a dagger in my own chest. An NTHE affair didn't explode into passion all at once. It unfolded gradually, like a dangerous lullaby. It was messages at midnight, shared secrets over coffee, a brush of the hand that lingered too long, and eventually, inevitably, it became physical. And I told myself it was just a phase, that I was figuring things out, that I wasn't really hurting anyone if I kept it quiet. NNBUT guilt has a way of seeping into the cracks. I began to see the pain I hadn't yet caused but knew I would. I'd look at my husband across the table and wonder, what will his face look like when he finds out? That question haunted me. And still, I didn't stop. NNWHY, didn't I stop? It's easy to judge from the outside, to say, you should have just left. But the truth is, I didn't want to leave. I wanted both lives. I wanted the comfort and safety of my husband, and the passion and spark of this other man. I wanted to feel alive without destroying everything I loved. NNBUT, that's not how life works. Love isn't a buffet where you take what you want and leave the rest behind. And then came the dreams. The nightmares, really. I'd wake up in cold sweats after seeing my husband's face as I confessed. I'd see him broken, crying, begging to understand. But those were just dreams. NNTHE, reality was worse. And I became distant. I started to pull away emotionally, trying to brace for the collapse. I'd lie and say I had to work late. I'd flinch when he touched me. He noticed? Of course he noticed. But he trusted me. He gave me the benefit of the doubt. Because that's the kind of man he is. And I betrayed that trust every single day. There was a moment, I remember, when he surprised me with dinner after a long work trip. Candles, wine, my favorite dessert. I sat there, staring at him, overwhelmed with shame. And yet I smiled. I told him I loved him. I kissed him goodnight. Then the next morning, I texted the other man. NNTHE truth is, when you cheat, it's not just a mistake. It's 1,000 little choices. It's dishonesty woven into every second of your day. And no matter how quiet you try to be, the weight of it grows louder and louder until it screams inside you. NNTHAT scream was getting too loud to ignore. Living a double life was exhausting in ways I never anticipated. It wasn't just the sneaking around or the lies I told. It was the way my heart started breaking in two. Every day felt like walking through a storm without an umbrella, trying not to drown in my own guilt. At first, I convinced myself I could handle it, that I was in control. But guilt is a heavy burden, and it doesn't stay silent forever. I started noticing the little things, how I would flinch when he reached for me, how I avoided his eyes during conversations, how my smile became more forced, more fragile. I tried to cover it up, but he could see something was wrong. I could see the confusion in his eyes, the flicker of worry. One night, he asked me straight, "Is there something you're not telling me?" And my heart nearly stopped. The words caught in my throat. I wanted to say yes. I wanted to confess everything. But the fear, the shame, the chaos inside me stopped the truth from coming out. NNSO, I lied. I'm just tired, I said. Stress at work. NNHE nodded. But I could see it wasn't enough. He didn't believe me, and he was right not to. NNTHE guilt began to eat at my soul. I would lie awake for hours after he fell asleep, my mind racing with what-ifs. What if he found out? What if he left me? What if I ruined everything I had built with my own hands? I cried silently, feeling trapped between who I was and who I had become. A wife who betrayed her vows, a woman torn apart by desire and regret. I hated myself, NNBUT. I was also scared of losing the only family I had known. Scared of facing the consequences of my actions. Scared of the pain I might cause the man who had given me his heart so freely. I was stuck in a nightmare I created. And no matter how much I wanted to wake up, I couldn't. TNTHE affair continued in the shadows, but the cracks in my marriage were beginning to show. I could no longer pretend that everything was fine. Because inside me, everything was breaking at 10, and I was scared of what would happen when the truth finally came to light. There's a moment in every story like mine when the dam finally breaks. When the weight of lies becomes too heavy to carry and everything comes crashing down. NNFOR me. That moment wasn't a dramatic showdown or a sudden confession. It was quiet. A fragile, shattering silence that filled the room one evening when I could no longer keep the facade. And I remember the night clearly. My husband and I were sitting on the couch after dinner, the house feeling too still. I could feel the tension between us, like an invisible thread, stretched tight and ready to snap. I was numb, barely able to meet his eyes. NNHE asked me again, this time softer, more desperate. "Are you happy?" And I choked on my answer because I knew I wasn't. But telling him that I was unhappy, that I'd betrayed him, that my heart was somewhere else, it felt impossible. Instead, I gave him the silence he didn't deserve. NNTHAT silence spoke louder than words. NNHE knew. I knew he knew. And in that moment I realized there was no going back. The truth had already begun to seep through the cracks, and soon it would flood everything. And days later, the confrontation came, not with anger, but with heartbreak. He sat me down and said, "I don't know what's going on, but I feel like I'm losing you." I wanted to scream, to beg for forgiveness, to explain everything. But the words caught in my throat. Because how do you explain that you cheated, not because he was unloving, but because you lost yourself? How do you confess that your betrayal was a cry for help you didn't know how to voice? NNTHE guilt I carried was suffocating. I wanted to make it right. I wanted to turn back time. But I also knew I had broken something sacred. NNWE began to talk, really talk, for the first time in years. It was painful, awkward, and raw. I laid my soul bare, telling him everything. The loneliness, the fear, the terrible choices. I cried as I spoke, ashamed yet desperate for some kind of redemption. NNHE cried too. Not out of anger, but out of sadness for the love we were losing. NNTHAT night, we didn't have answers. We didn't know if we could heal. But we had honesty. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like a start. NNTHE hardest part wasn't the act of cheating. It was facing the consequences and realizing that love, trust, and forgiveness are battles fought in silence and tears. And I share this with you not for sympathy or judgment, but because if you're out there feeling lost, broken, or alone, know this: you're not beyond redemption. Healing is possible. But it starts with truth. After that painful conversation, I thought the worst was behind us. I believed that honesty, no matter how painful, would be enough to rebuild what I had broken. But the truth is, the damage caused by betrayal isn't limited to just two people. It spreads like ripples on a pond, touching everything around it. And our relationship didn't just fracture between the two of us. It fractured the entire foundation of our life together. Friends started noticing my withdrawal, my husband's silence. There were awkward moments with family gatherings, subtle questions, and concerned looks. The secret that once lived quietly inside me had exploded into a public wound. And even worse, I watched the person I loved suffer in ways I could never have imagined. The man who had trusted me so completely became a shadow of himself. His smile, once so warm and genuine, became rare and forced. He stopped talking about our future, stopped making plans, and I hated myself for it. I wanted to fix everything, to erase the past, but some things aren't so easily undone. I realized that forgiveness isn't a switch you flip. It's a long, agonizing process that takes time, patience, and a willingness to face uncomfortable truths every day. NTHE hardest part wasn't just his pain, it was my own. I felt isolated in my guilt. I wondered if I would ever feel whole again. Would I ever be able to look in the mirror without seeing the woman who shattered a life she once promised to protect? And then, there was the other man, NTHE1, who had given me a momentary escape, a flicker of passion, but ultimately brought chaos into my life. Our relationship ended not with a dramatic fight, but with a quiet understanding that what we had was never real, never sustainable. It was built on lies, stolen moments, and empty promises. I walked away from that chapter with a heavy heart but clearer eyes. I realized that my affair wasn't just about him or my husband, it was about me. About the parts of myself I had ignored for years. And I knew that if I wanted to heal, I had to start by forgiving myself. That's what I want to share with you. Guilt is heavy, but self-forgiveness is the first step toward freedom. It's the hardest step, but it's the one that saves you. NIF? You're watching this and feeling broken because of mistakes you've made. Please remember, your story doesn't end here. You can find your way back, but only if you face the truth, embrace the pain, and begin to heal. And after the dust settled and the initial shock wore off, I realized that the hardest journey wasn't the confession or the fallout, it was the path to forgiveness. Forgiving someone who hurt you deeply is tough enough, but learning to forgive yourself after betraying the one you love felt almost impossible. NFOR weeks. I lived in a fog of shame and regret. Every morning, I woke up wondering if I could ever make things right. Could I rebuild the trust that I shattered? Could I show him that I was worthy of his love again? NTHE answer wasn't simple. Healing takes time, much more time than I expected. There were days when I felt hopeful, moments when we connected, and days when I wanted to give up entirely. I started by being completely honest, not just with him, but with myself. I stopped making excuses and faced the truth about why I cheated. I had to understand my own loneliness, my fears, and the parts of my marriage that I had ignored. This wasn't about blaming anyone else. It was about owning my mistakes and learning from them. Therapy became a lifeline. Talking to someone who listened without judgment helped me unpack my feelings and understand the damage I caused. It was painful to confront my failures, but it was necessary. I also made a commitment to my husband, not just through words but through actions, to be transparent. I stopped hiding texts, stopped sneaking around emotionally or physically. I made a promise to rebuild our foundation, brick by brick. Trust, I learned, is fragile. It can be broken in an instant, but takes years to rebuild. It's earned not with grand gestures, but with consistent honesty, patience, and vulnerability. Slowly, our conversations changed. They became deeper, more authentic. We talked about what we wanted, what we needed, and how we could grow together. It wasn't easy, and there were many setbacks, but with every step forward, I saw glimmers of the love that had once drawn us together. Now, I'm not here to say that everything is perfect now. Healing is messy. It's unpredictable. It demands courage and commitment every single day. But I am here to say that healing is possible. And if you're struggling with guilt or pain from infidelity, whether you're the one who cheated or the one who was hurt, know that you are not alone. There is hope, and there is a way forward, and it starts with truth. It grows with forgiveness, and it blossoms with love that is willing to fight for a second chance. As I journeyed through the aftermath of my choices, I discovered something I never expected. Infidelity taught me profound lessons about who I really was and who I wanted to become. And at first, all I saw was my failure. I was consumed by shame, guilt, and regret. But slowly, beneath those heavy feelings, I found glimpses of self-awareness and growth. It was like looking into a shattered mirror and seeing the pieces, painful but real. One of the hardest truths I faced was how much I had neglected myself in the marriage, not in a blaming way, but honestly. I had lost sight of my own needs, desires, and identity. I thought being a good wife meant sacrificing everything, but in reality, I had sacrificed my own happiness. That realization didn't excuse my betrayal, but it helped me understand why I made such a devastating mistake. It was a wake-up call to prioritize my own well-being and to communicate openly, not just with my husband, but with myself. Infidelity forced me to confront my fears. Fear of loneliness, fear of being invisible, fear of not being enough. I learned that those fears don't disappear by cheating. They only grow louder until you face them head-on. I also discovered the power of vulnerability. To truly heal, I had to be vulnerable, not just confessing my mistakes but allowing myself to be seen in my brokenness. It was terrifying to be that open, but it was also liberating. Through this process, I developed empathy, deep, raw empathy for my husband, for myself, and for anyone who has ever struggled with betrayal, whether as the one who betrayed or the one who was betrayed. This journey also taught me the importance of forgiveness, not just asking for it, but giving it. Forgiving myself has been the hardest and most necessary part. It's not about forgetting or excusing what I did. It's about accepting my flaws and committing to be better. There's one thing I want you to take away from my story. It's this. Mistakes don't define you. How you respond to them does. Infidelity isn't a failure of love. Sometimes, it's a failure of communication, understanding, and self-awareness. But it doesn't have to be the end of your story. It can be the beginning of a deeper, more honest relationship with yourself and others. I'm still healing. I'm still learning. But every day, I'm choosing to grow beyond my past. I had known how difficult rebuilding trust would be. I might have been too afraid to try. But love, real love, is worth fighting for, even when the wounds are deep and the pain feels unbearable. Rebuilding trust wasn't a single moment or conversation. It was a series of small, often invisible steps. It meant showing up every day with honesty, transparency, and patience. It meant accepting his doubts, his anger, and his silence without pushing him away. One of the hardest parts was accepting that I couldn't control his forgiveness. I wanted him to move on quickly, to forget the betrayal, to pretend it never happened. But healing isn't about pretending. It's about facing the truth together, even when it hurts. And I remember times when he would ask questions that stung like knives. Where were you? Who was he? Why? I answered as truthfully as I could, even when it was painful. I learned that honesty is the only foundation strong enough to rebuild broken trust. And at the same time, I had to rebuild trust with myself. I needed to prove to myself that I was capable of change, that I deserved a second chance. That meant setting boundaries, resisting temptation, and being accountable for my actions. Therapy sessions together became our safe space, a place where we could speak openly without judgment. Sometimes, it felt like we were tearing each other apart, but in reality, we were slowly weaving new threads of connection. There were setbacks, moments when doubt crept back in, when old wounds reopened, and the past seemed impossible to leave behind. But every time, we chose to keep going. Now I want anyone who's listening and struggling with broken trust to know this. Healing is possible, but it requires time, effort, and most importantly, willingness from both sides. You can't rush forgiveness, and you can't force trust. But if you're willing to be patient, to communicate openly, and to hold space for each other's pain, you can start to rebuild what was lost. NFOR me. This process has been humbling and transformative. It's made me more compassionate, more understanding, and more committed to living truthfully. Trust isn't something you get back overnight. It's earned day by day, choice by choice. And despite everything, I believe that love can survive even the darkest storms if it's rooted in honesty, respect, and forgiveness. The storm of betrayal didn't just pass. It changed everything. Our lives, our relationship, and even the way I saw myself were transformed forever. But living after the storm, after the raw emotions, the tears, the anger, was a different kind of challenge. NFOR, a long time, there was silence. Not the peaceful kind, but the heavy silence filled with unspoken pain and questions. We had to relearn how to talk, how to listen, and most importantly, how to trust. Sometimes I felt like I was walking on eggshells, afraid that one wrong word or gesture would shatter the fragile peace we had built. I often wondered if things would ever feel normal again, or if normal had been lost forever. NBUT gradually, we found new rhythms. We created new memories, small moments of joy that reminded us why we had chosen each other in the first place. These moments didn't erase the past, but they helped us move forward. One thing I didn't expect was how the experience deepened my empathy, not just for my husband, but for others who have faced similar pain. I realized how common and complex these struggles are, and how important it is to approach them with kindness, not judgment. And I also learned to be kinder to myself. The shame and guilt had weighed me down for so long, but living with those feelings doesn't heal you. It traps you. Accepting my mistakes and forgiving myself allowed me to begin living fully again. Our relationship is far from perfect, and some scars remain, but those scars tell a story of survival, resilience, and hope. They remind us that even when trust is broken, love can be rebuilt if you're willing to do the hard work. NFOR. Anyone watching who is living through a similar storm, whether you've been betrayed or you've betrayed someone, know that healing is messy, painful, but possible. It requires honesty, patience, and a deep commitment to growth. Life after infidelity isn't about forgetting what happened. It's about learning to live with the lessons and choosing to build something better. This is not the end of our story. It's a new beginning. As I sit here reflecting on everything that has happened, I realize that my story isn't just about betrayal or mistakes. It's about hope. It's about healing. And most importantly, it's about the courage to move forward. Infidelity changed me in ways I never imagined. It shattered my world, yes, but it also gave me a chance to rebuild a stronger foundation. A foundation built on honesty, vulnerability, and genuine connection. And moving forward hasn't been easy. There were days when I wanted to give up, when the weight of guilt felt unbearable, but I chose to keep going. Not just for myself, but for the man I love, and for the life we're trying to reclaim. And I've learned that healing is not linear. Some days feel like progress, others feel like setbacks. But every day is a step toward becoming a better version of myself. If you're listening and struggling with the aftermath of infidelity, whether as the one who cheated or the one who was hurt, know this: you are not alone. Your pain is valid. Your feelings are real. And healing is possible. Start by being honest with yourself. Face your mistakes with courage and compassion. Seek help if you need it, whether through therapy, support groups, or trusted friends. And don't be afraid to communicate openly with your partner, no matter how difficult it feels. Remember, forgiveness is a gift you give yourself as much as the other person. It doesn't mean forgetting or excusing the hurt. It means choosing to release the hold it has over your life. Most of all, hold on to hope. Love can survive even the darkest times if you're willing to fight for it with patience and truth. NMY journey is far from over, but I'm grateful for the lessons I've learned. I'm grateful for the chance to rebuild trust and love, and I'm hopeful for the future we're creating together. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonates with you, please know that your story matters too. Healing begins with a single step, and sometimes the bravest thing you can do is to share your truth.